From Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban to Avengers: Age of Ultron, the movies I have for you today have one thing in common: the directors weren't on board with them. Why wouldn't they want to make a movie that's destined for success? There's more to their feelings than meets the eye, and that's a good segue to talking about Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen. The easy joke to make about Michael Bay's Transformers sequel is that he didn't want to make it because it sucked. Turns out that's actually what happened. Bay wasn't happy with the screenplay he got, and he openly admitted that the movie was crap. There were two reasons why Revenge of the Fallen fell short of its predecessor. The first was that the filmmakers were forced to bang out the story in just 3 weeks. But the bigger problem was that working conditions like this had triggered a writer's strike across the industry. If you're too young to remember this movement, the entire Writers Guild of America stopped working for a period from 2007 to 2008. They were looking for higher wages. As a result, a lot of movies and shows that were written in 2007 and 2008 turned out to be really bad. Revenge of the Fallen still managed to be a success story in its own right, despite being an awful movie that's widely regarded to be the worst in a series of awful movies.
Die like your brother! They were your brothers too.
It made close to $900 million. Bay's time helming this franchise was far from over. And speaking of lowlights in long-running franchises, we're now heading to the MCU. Yeah, director Alan Taylor doesn't like Thor: The Dark World any more than you do. While this movie has received some competition in the past year, the second Thor movie used to be the worst movie of the entire franchise. It was one of a few things that the entire MCU fanbase could universally agree on. What was extra disappointing about how The Dark World turned out is that the movie was directed by Alan Taylor. The director was probably hired because he'd recently done some stellar episodes for Game of Thrones. Now, Taylor says that it was interference from the studio that ruined this movie.
Will you let her die? What help were you and yourself? Who put me there?
He was surprised by the sheer difference between what he sent to the editing room and what came out. To this day, he insists that the movie he made was way better, and we'd agree if we ever got to see it. Is that a thing that could happen? Probably not, since Marvel Studios has never done director's cuts. Here's a fun fact for you. This exact story appears to have played out with Thor: Love and Thunder.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe even numbered Thor movies are cursed. Here's one more from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Avengers: Age of Ultron wasn't exactly Joss Whedon's fault.
Killed someone? Wouldn't have been my first call.
Whedon may be persona non grata in Hollywood and the internet these days, but things were different in the mid-2010s. Having directed the first Avengers movie, Joss Whedon was considered to be the guy that proved the potential behind the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That's definitely why he was invited back to direct the sequel a few years later, but by the time he was finished with this movie, the director swore off ever working with Marvel Studios again. What happened? Apparently, Marvel kept clashing with Whedon on the creative vision for this movie. I can see why Marvel kept forcing Joss to do things their way. Age of Ultron sets up a lot of plot lines and story threads that weave through the series all the way up to Avengers: Endgame. It looks like Kevin Feige had to remind Joss Whedon who wears the hat at Marvel Studios. Let's move on to a Marvel movie that wasn't made by Disney. I had to put the infamous story of Spider-Man 3 on this list. Sam Raimi was a rock star in the superhero movie genre back in the 2000s. Wait, that's not right. You might say that Raimi basically created the superhero genre with his Spider-Man movie. His return to direct the third part of the trilogy was basically routine, and Raimi already knew what he was going to do with it. The plan was to have Sandman as a villain of the film. But Raimi also wanted to complete Harry Osborn's villain transformation. Sony Pictures took a look at this and said, "This is great and all, but we want to shove Venom in there." Now, Venom is a popular character, so you could see where Sony was coming from. but Raimi didn't want the suits to interfere with his movie. Alas, when it comes to Marvel movies, it's the suits that always get their way apparently. The movie has been criticized for being overstuffed with villains for over a decade since its release. That criticism has continued, even as the movie has aged relatively well. As far as the suits go, though, they're probably satisfied with how the movie turned out. It's the highest-grossing movie of the franchise, with a box office haul of $900 million. Up next is a director who was one and done on a different massive franchise. Alfonso Cuarón went off his beaten path to make Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban.
Boggarts are shapeshifters. They take the shape of whatever a particular person fears the most. That's what makes them so...
For a lot of Harry Potter fans, the third movie of the series is undoubtedly the best one. It marks a turning point in the series from childlike whimsy to dark and serious subject. And reflecting that shift, the movie is also directed more artfully than its predecessors. But anyone who knows the work of Alfonso Cuarón isn't going to be surprised that his one and only Harry Potter movie was the best one. Fans of the director might be surprised that he took on a movie like this at all. Across a pretty long career, Cuarón has only directed a handful of movies. Most of them were his own original ideas, with the exceptions of Great Expectations and Children of Men. As you'd expect from hearing this, Cuarón was about to coolly reject the offer to direct Prisoner of Azkaban. It was actually Guillermo del Toro who convinced him to zip it, read the books, and do the movie. Cuarón took his friend's advice and was impressed enough by the books to sign up for Prisoner of Azkaban. And the rest, of course, is history. Speaking of history, let's dive into the past for the next movie. The story of Blade Runner is basically cinema legend. This is a movie that's so good it's well known by people who aren't even into sci-fi classics. It also got an equally brilliant sequel decades down the line with Blade Runner 2049. But what you might not know is that Blade Runner is a movie that faced a lot of challenges in its day. We're closing with another tale of studio interference, folks, and this time they were backed up by the dreaded test audiences. Director Ridley Scott's vision of the movie was so out of this world in the 80s that audiences responded negatively to it. This led to studio-mandated changes, like including a voiceover from Harrison Ford and a happy ending. Did those changes make the movie more marketable? It's hard to say, but the studio's version of the movie did decently well at the box office. Of course, no one who talks about the movie these days refers to the version that came out in theaters. This is a rare story where the director actually got his revenge. In 2007, Scott was able to release his final cut of the movie. That is the one that's considered to be one of the greatest sci-fi films of all time. Apparently, Blade Runner didn't need a voiceover or happy ending to be good. That's all the stories of directors being unhappy with movies I have for you today.